Welcome to the Climb Podcast, where we empower women of color in their pursuit of leadership roles. I am your host, Felicia Smith, the founder of The Climb. The Climb Inc. is a 501c3 organization committed to increasing the number of women of color in leadership and managerial positions. Each week, we will dive into topics that have been mystified and give the practical, real, and relevant insights into how to navigate as a woman of color in these spaces. And today is one of my favorite episodes, which is called Her Climb, where we get the opportunity to talk to a woman of color who has shattered some glass ceilings or all the metaphors that we use. And today we have Miss Valary Alston. Miss Valary, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh my goodness. Good evening, Felicia. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yes, so I'm going to read your bio before we start because I think people have to know a little bit about your background before we even start. So Miss Alston completed 20 years in the United States Marine Corps, which is amazing, finishing her military career as a civil affairs liaison, stationed around the United States and overseas. Currently, she coordinates with the DoD Fourth Estate Combatant Commands, Defense Intelligence Enterprise, intelligence community, and industry partners to integrate strategies and initiatives that drive innovation to better promote equity across all aspects of the acquisition process. Ms. Alston champions the development of the finance and acquisition workforce by identifying continuous improvement opportunities and driving the learning strategy by leveraging a variety of teaching applications and tools to include workforce policies and processes that support the F&A workforce modernization within the Defense Intelligence Agency. In her previous assignment, she was responsible for assessing and assisting the development of acquisition and procurement policies, processes, and technologies that support them in a consonance with the requirements of DIA, the General Defense Intelligence Program, and the intelligence community. She provides advice and guidance to the DIA Director, Deputy Director, Chief Financial Officer, Senior Acquisition Executive, and Associate Deputy Directors on matters pertaining to strategic planning, audit compliance, program management, resource requirements, and applying the best acquisition community practices. While on active duty, Ms. Alston completed her undergraduate studies in business administration at the University of Maryland Global Campus. Ms. Alston also began a new assignment with the NSA in June of 2024, where she became the Deputy Chief of Operations and Engagements and Policy Program Executive Office. In this capacity, she supports NSA by providing strategic decisions to maximize NSA's budget resources to advance strategic priorities. That is amazing bio. Welcome again. But I am really, really curious about how you transitioned from your 20 years in the Marine Corps to how you got here. So tell us a little bit in the beginning about your origin story.
Oh my goodness. One, I want to say just hearing that bio makes me realize that it sounds like a lot, but it really is just managing things that we buy every day and managing money. But a little bit about my story is one, I'll start off, I'm from a family of, there were 7 of us. And so a lot of kids, a lot of decisions, and just my mama. And she instilled in us a lot of, a lot of different values, and to be able to work on our own, to make our own decisions, to find out the best path for us. One way I initially came into the Marine Corps was on a dare from one of my older brothers.
What?
Yes, he was graduating high school and he said, "Hey, I bet you can't come down here and pass this test." He was going to take the test for the Marine Corps. And I was like, "Oh my gosh, it's a test." And in my mind, because I had always been like at the top of my class in schools, I was like, it's just a test. So I went down and I took the test with him. I passed, he failed, and he ended up going into the Army, and I went into the Marine Corps.
Oh my
So it was crazy. So that journey took me, and I had no plans on staying in as long as I did. I said, maybe I'll go in for a few. I liked the way the uniforms looked; they were cute, and I said maybe I'll go in for a couple of years and then come out and do something different. Well, I got in there, and after I went through boot camp, I came out and I was like, this is great. I mean, while I was in boot camp, they said, you are part of the world's finest fighting machines ever. And I was like, yes, that is me. I am that fighting machine. And it just took off. Something in me said, this is where you belong. So from that journey, and then I was on my last duty station was down in Quantico, Virginia. And it was right after 9/11, and I was considering what to do. They had a stop hold on everyone who was going to retire. And I said, what can I do after this? And because I was working in graduate education programs, there was a gentleman that said, hey, why don't you, try and go into the federal government and work those programs over there. Well, I had already received my program management certification while I was in the Marine Corps. And I was like, okay, well, I hadn't thought about that. And I was like, well, I don't know where to go. I didn't know the first thing about it. And he said, start out, come over to be a contractor. And I was like, don't know what they are, but sounds good. Okay. Um, I went to a company called MPRI, which I believe they've been purchased by another organization by now. And they said, you have all these qualifications, we'll bring you in as a program manager. And I said, great. So I went in, I did that for about a year and a half. And while I was there, and I actually, that contracting position was at DIA. So
Mm.
early in my career, and that's the first I had ever heard of DIA. I had heard of NSA, I had heard of CIA, of course, all the other three-letter agencies, but I had never heard of DIA. So when I got in there, I had no idea what their mission was. I had no idea what their role was. I had no idea what they did. And I was like, well, I don't know if I want to stay here. But when I got in there and learned about the mission of the Defense Intelligence Agency, I was like, wow, I think I want to do this for a while. So I stayed there for a year.
Mhm.
I didn't want to do it that long there.
You change your mind. You change your mind.
I did. And I got what I call a clarion call because
Mm.
there was another organization that was standing up, and they said they were going to be the oversight agency of the intelligence community, which then it was the Office of the Director of National Intelligence
Okay.
in its infancy stage. And I said, this, okay. I applied for a position over there, and the position that I applied for, the gentleman said, you're just not what I'm looking for,
Mm.
but he said, I know somebody who's looking for someone with your qualifications. And he sent me over to the gentleman. We had the interview, and he hired me. He ended up hiring me. I was a little, when you hear that you're not what I'm looking for, you get kind of in your feelings about this. So I went to ODNI. I went over there and I helped stand up their contract office. And that's where I was for 17 years.
Well, you did like that one. You
I
stayed there for a while.
Yes, yes. So I enjoyed that, and then I transitioned back over to DIA once I felt it was time to do something different. But in that space, that I would say 2 years from when first leaving the military to my first time, the first year I spent at DIA, and then moving over to ODNI, it was a lot of thoughts that were going on in my head, basically saying, what do I want to do when I grow up? So I didn't think that being the military was easy for me. There was structure. Everybody was kind of moving to the beat of the same drum. We all knew what we were doing, and if we were called upon to go out into the field or wherever it was, we were going to go. But this whole thing of life after that was difficult, and it's difficult for a lot of people. And so that caused me to do a lot of praying, a lot of searching, a lot of seeking God's face to say, where should I go? What should I do? And when the opportunity opened to go in as a contractor, I said, I think I'll do it. And it wasn't because, like I said, it wasn't because I knew about DIA. It wasn't because I knew about the mission. It was because I really didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up. Trying to find that and figure that out. It's difficult. And I know that a lot of women are in that space sometimes.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and so it can be difficult trying to transition over, and you really have to be intentional
Yeah.
about what you do.
What that's actually a good segue is like you talked a little bit about trying to figure out what you wanted to be
Yeah.
when you grew up, and then you threw an intentionality, which is my favorite word. Like, what does being intentional in trying to figure out what you want to do next look like? Like, what are some of the steps someone should even take or be thinking about when they're trying to figure out what's next?
Yeah, the main thing is to, and I'm not very good at it still, is to get a book, a notebook, a diary, whatever they say, and then to begin to write out all the things that you feel you're good at doing. And I kind of did that initially. I said this, so this is what I'm good at doing. One, I'm good at talking. I have a tongue in my mouth, and I think it should be moved, right? So I will. And I said I like to talk. I like to be around people. I like how uh, looking at something and thinking of an idea and crafting that will then journey into something else. So I began to write down what I was good at, not what somebody said I was good at, because there were a lot of people that said, "Oh, because I'm almost 6 feet tall," and so people were saying, "Oh, you should play basketball. You should do this. You should do that." But I was like, I'm not good at that. I wasn't good at
Okay.
basketball. I wasn't, sports wasn't my thing. Well, I ran, but it wasn't something that I didn't feel, oh, this is great, I want to do this forever. No, I didn't want to do that forever. But begin to write down the things that you're good at, and then start mapping out what's good and what's not so good about each of those things that you feel that you're good at. And once you identify what's good about that thing, whatever it is, say, what will it take for me to become an expert in doing this? And if you can narrow it down to 2 things on your list, because I'm not saying get a sheet of paper and write a whole book out, but maybe track down 5 things that you think you're good at. And out of those 5 things, identify the top 2 that you are the best at. And then try and
Right.
figure out of those 2 things, what triggers you to say, I can do this even better. So that's how you begin to you begin to intentionally look at yourself and what you can do, and not what other people say you should be doing.
And that's really amazing advice because I think in the age of social media, where everyone's looking at everybody else, when everyone is like putting on their best foot forward, which you should, but everyone's putting on their best foot forward, it sometimes can be discouraging because they're trying to figure out like, well, what do I do? How do I figure it out? So I would call, although your career aligned, I would call it still a bit unconventional. You spent 20 years in the Marines and then transition from a contractor to then go like full government. In those moments, were there ever times where you felt like you needed to pivot or you needed to adjust or change to survive in either one of those atmospheres, whether that was in the Marine Corps or at ODNI?
In the Marine Corps, absolutely. I had those times. It's each time I was up to go to another duty station, I had to stop and reassess where I'm going to go, what that means to my family, who will I was in during a time where in the 80s when I first went in, I'm not going to tell anybody how old I am, but I went in the 80s as a young girl. And when I got pregnant the first time, they said, you have to do one of 2 things. You have to either sign your child over to someone to care for, or you have to leave. And I was like, what am I going to do? So, my husband was also active duty, but he didn't have to make that choice. I did.
Wow.
So the men were able to just, impregnate whomever, go wherever they want to go, because they left you with this thing in your head that said, we didn't, if we wanted you to have a husband or a wife, we would have issued you one,
Issued you one. I knew you were
right?
gonna say issued you one.
Yes.
Oh my
And
God.
so I made a choice to leave,
Wow.
because I was like, I can't sign my child over. Who am I going to sign my child over to? And it was just and I, even though I felt it wasn't fair, that's what the rules were at the time. But I ended up then making a decision, after they softened the rules and our son had gotten older, to go back in. Um,
Okay.
so
Okay.
yes, so it's very. I when I left, I went into the reserves just so I wouldn't just leave altogether. I wanted to still be a part, and then I was like, I need to go back in because that's my heart's desire to be in. So all along the way, transitioning, all that pivoting to say, is this going to be a good place to go? Well, when I was called to go, my husband went, he was in South Carolina, and they said there was a rule out there that said we could only be 300 miles away from each other. So he went to South Carolina, and they sent me to Japan. And I,
Whoa.
that's not, am I looking at the right map? Because it
That's
doesn't,
not the wow.
that's not 300 miles. And they were like, oh, well, what do you know?
Did you
So
still have to go?
yes, I did.
Whoa.
So I went there, and we ended up leaving our son, and having my husband's grandmother at the time. She, kept him while I was overseas, and it is very difficult. It was a difficult decision to make because he was just learning how to be potty trained. He was almost 2 years old, and I was lost. And I was like, I just don't understand this. So then it was, do I get out? Do I leave this alone? So, in each stage of my career, it was the transition of am I doing the right thing? Am I
Yeah.
making the right decisions as far as my children, as far as my husband, and even as far as me and what I want to do concerned. So it wasn't difficult. Some of the decisions weren't the best decisions. And now that I'm older, I see that maybe I should have gone a different route. But I went the route I went at the time because at that moment I felt it was the best decision to make. And yeah, so there were difficult times of being able to pivot, but it was a constant pivot while I was in the Marine Corps, more so than it has been in my journey in the federal government.
Yeah, but what you talk about, I always say I think we don't talk about enough, and that's like being a mom, being a wife, and then
Yeah,
still trying to like manage your own career and the guilt of whether you made the right decision, whether you did the right thing, and
yeah.
really the sacrifices and trade-offs. So you just talked about a lot of sacrifices and trade-offs. If you had advice for a young woman who's in the Marines or a young woman who just went into the government and is doing a similar thing, what advice would you give her?
Oh wow. I know people hear all the time, follow your heart or follow your gut. Um, I won't say that. What I will say is if you are a young lady and if you have a spouse, someone significant in your life, have the discussions with them up front and have it with them often. Make that be a piece of your discussion that there might be an opportunity that comes in front of me where we're going to have to make a decision for that will affect our entire family. Because remember, when you make a decision, it's not just you, it is everybody that's behind you, pushing
Yeah,
you forward that you're
yeah,
making that decision for. And it'll
that's good.
affect all of those people. So I would say have those conversations. And they're not going to be easy. It's not going to sit down. You're not going to sit down and go, oh, hey, this is what I'm going to do. Yay. And the rose petals fall from the sky. That's not what happens. Tensions are created, and you have to give the individual who's with you time to digest what you're talking about. You have to give them time to digest. You can't say, what do you think about this decision, and expect them to give you a response in 5 minutes. It has to be allow them to digest it, allow them to think about it, and then come back. And then also make sure you put your pros and cons down on paper and share them with the individual. And I think I will say this, I believe that as women of color, we don't do that enough.
Yeah, yeah.
We kind of take it for granted that what we say, somebody's going to agree with and they're going to be okay with it. And then there become all of those feelings that are behind that in on the back end. And it may not be conducive to a good working relationship later on. So you really have to allow yourself that and allow them that space to hear what you're saying and even ask them, what are your thoughts? And you may not have any right now, but come back and we'll talk about the decision. And if it's not best for the entire family, then I'll have to go another route. It may not be the one that you think you should go on, but it'll be a different course of action, and you'll keep harmony in your home, which is the number one thing.
And that's the other trade-off to your point, right? It's not,
Yeah,
even if you are the person who your career is soaring or you're trying to seek whatever aspirations you have, if there's two of you and there's a child, there still has to be harmony and in peace. I won't say
yeah,
balance, I'll say peace in your house.
yes,
That
yes.
is that is so important. Wow. That was really good. I honestly feel like we don't have enough of those conversations. I remember even earlier in my career, I had a mentor who said like, "Oh no, there's going to be trade-offs. Like, don't think you're gonna, if you're pursuing a life in leadership, you're
Yeah.
not going to be able to do all the things. You're not going to make all of the meetings, all the games, and you need to begin to think about whether you want to make that sacrifice. Like you said, write it down. Think about the challenges that may go on, and are you ready for it? Is your family ready for it? Like
Yes.
all those things are important.
Yes. My husband and I, we've been married 40 years. We just celebrated our 40th anniversary. Our,
Congratulations.
thank you. Our kids are what we say grown and gone. And, and now we're watching our grandchildren. And I just said to him just before we started do you feel that you've missed important times and milestones in their lives? Because like I said, he was active duty as well. Right? Do
Mhm.
you feel that you've missed them? And he said, absolutely. He said, I feel we missed opportunities to do, certain things with them, like basketball games and especially when our son was in high school, because that's when our careers were going, because we had him so early. But
Mhm.
when our daughter came along, we were on the downside of our careers. He was getting ready to, he was, on his way to retire in a few years. And so he was able to spend that necessary time with her in high school that our son didn't get. And so you do make those trade-offs. But then you also think, were they the right decisions? And sometimes you have a little guilt. Let's be honest. Everybody walks away with a little guilt over the decisions that they
Absolutely.
make.
Absolutely. Because it's someone else's life in the balance, particularly when it comes to kids, right?
Yeah,
It's not just you think about how is this going to impact them 5 years from now, or when they
yeah.
turn 21, are they going to have a complex because I wasn't here? Like all of those things come into play.
Yes, yes. I even told my husband, I said, I should have been on Oprah. All the things, I'm surprised my kids didn't have me on Dr. Phil or somewhere talking about she was a terrible mom. Yeah, well,
I understand. So with all of those sacrifices, though, you have made it, many will say an extraordinary career. Like at what point did you know that you were breaking glass ceilings? Because you did break glass ceilings. At what point did you say, you know what, I'm knocking down some bricks?
um, wow. Oh boy. I will say there are times when I still don't recognize what I've done.
Mm.
My husband brings it to my attention a lot, because I told him, I said, I just don't feel like I've done enough. And he was like, you have to be kidding. He was like, you have achieved something that so many others don't realize. And it could be because of the area that we live in, that it does not seem like it's a big thing to me in general. But I also, because I will say that, and people who say this, sometimes I'm like, oh my goodness, here we go again with the, I'm so humble. Believe me, I'm not humble. I love to hear about me. I love I love to hear, I love to talk about me. I love it. I love it. I love it. But there are also times when I feel that I haven't done enough. I've not achieved what other people have achieved. And I
Mhm.
may never be the individual that is on the news. I may never be the individual that the world knows my name. I may never be that person. But I will say that my greatest achievement has been what I have done for God. Um,
That's
and not what I have done here, although it's been great, and God has opened doors that I've never even knew that He would open. I think the first time, going back to your question, I think the first time I realized that there was something that I had blocked, had knocked a little piece of the ceiling open, was the very first time I was able to bring somebody in and to assist them with getting a job. And I say assist them because let's be clear, you don't get people jobs. They have to do the work themselves behind it.
yeah.
I was placed in a position where I was able to offer opportunities for
Yeah.
people to get jobs. And what I did was I offered opportunities to women and men of color,
That's good.
because I looked around in my atmosphere as I was moving up in my career, and I said, if more of us can get in and get at the higher levels, we don't have to worry about sitting in rooms and spaces where we are the onlyest one. You
Talk
know,
about it. Talk about it.
And so I said, I'm not going, I did not want to have, and I'm so glad I never had that crabs in the pot mentality where, oh, the water's hot, but I'm gonna kick you off me and throw you into the hot water. I have always said, if I can reach back down and pull somebody else up, they can do that with somebody else. And then that person can do that with somebody else. And we can get in there and we can begin to start taking over. And what I was able to see, several people that I had recommended apply for the position, and they got those jobs. I was like, this is amazing. Let's keep doing this.
Yeah, that's good. I've never heard, and actually to your point, I don't even think you get to a point where you don't even realize that there's power there, right? That there is power for the ability for you to be able to recognize talent,
Yeah.
to recommend them, but then also to do the work to get there. I've never even thought of it that way. That actually it really is breaking. It's like putting a notch in the glass ceiling every time we're able to bring someone else up. That's powerful. I never thought about it that way.
Well,
That
thank
is,
you.
yeah. I mean, and it's just that is the goal of the climb. So
Yeah.
the fact that it's like, wow, I never even thought of that as, something, an aspiration that we should all be, trying to achieve. Like the
Yes.
ability to have that kind of influence to make those kind of decisions. That's powerful. Wow, I love that. So what do you think, or you talked about a little bit in we were talking about parenting and being in the Marines and all those pieces, some thoughts you had, but if you had the opportunity to tell your younger self something today, what would it be? What would you tell her that you think that she needs to know to survive?
Oh my. I would absolutely tell my younger self that, listen, you will be in areas where it looks like there are more of them than there are of you, and they are all against you. But you have to learn to not compromise who you are. Don't compromise what you stand for. Don't compromise your values or your beliefs, but in everything, don't stand in confidence of the values that you bring and what you know to do and what you know is true. I would tell myself to speak my truth to power, regardless of who I feel is listening or who is not listening. Stand in the confidence to know what you know.
That's good. That's good. That's good. And that's one of the things I think we lose a lot. When we talk about going into leadership, we see versions of leadership that don't look like us, and we try to mimic that. And when we mimic that, we lose pieces of us, our values, who we are, our background. And then a lot of people will find themselves mid-career like, wait a minute, who am I? Because I've spent so much time, focusing on, in some ways, placating
Yes,
to what
yes.
everyone else wants to see, that now I'm like, well, who am I naturally and genuinely in these spaces? I love that. So the foundation is so important. I don't think we realize how important it is to like check in with ourselves and make sure that we're still solid,
Yes.
regardless of what's happening. Are we still solid?
Absolutely, absolutely. We have to do that, and we can't go in and compromise who we are, right? By just very much like you said, looking at them saying that must be the way I should go, and I hear people say that they had the imposter, they felt they had that imposter syndrome. But I told a friend of mine, I said I used to think that I had the imposter syndrome as well, and that one day I was going to be found out, right? And I said, and then I began to listen to the other voices in the room and realize that they are imposters just like I was. None of us knew none of us knew everything. We were all trying to pivot and be the first one to have the best idea. And I was like, oh my goodness, we all sound like we're disoriented. We all sound crazy. We all sound like we don't know why we're here. And I said, so it's not just me, it's all of them. The difference is how you present that.
That's real.
If you sit in the back or you sit on the corner, you come into the room and you immediately go to the back chair against the wall, then you've already identified that you've already spoken volumes without opening your mouth by saying, I don't really belong in here, so I'll fade into the back. But when you come into the room and you're confident in who you are, sit at the table. Even if you don't have confidence and you're afraid, sit at the table afraid, but sit at the table.
You know, you just brought up a good piece, actually. I'm actually, which two things you just said that they both apply to me. Number one, imposter syndrome. But number two, it's the sitting in the room. And I want us to dive in this a bit because I tell people, hey, when you go in the room, sit at the table, sit up straight. I have gotten into a place where I don't necessarily like to sit at the table anymore. And it's not because I don't feel powerful or because I know it's like for some meetings, I'm like, well, why am I at the table? If I don't have anything, if it's not my meeting and I don't have anything amazing to say, let me sit on a comfy couch. But you just brought up a good point that people are absolutely judging or saying, well, she doesn't feel like she should be at the table. How do you navigate those unspoken? Because what you're talking about is unspoken things that are going on that you might not even really know are going on. Or maybe you know, like me, and then you start ignoring it because you're just like, I don't feel like sitting at the table every time because it's just me there and it's the rest of the white men.
Yep. Yep. You know, I said, I moved from a table of a few white men to now I'm in a whole conference room full of white men. And I was like, Lord, it's just me. But when I go into that table and, you know, and I said, I keep telling myself, reminding myself daily, Valary, you have a large personality. You can't make yourself smaller, no matter how hard you try. You can't make yourself quieter. You have got to just be you. So go in the room and sit where you feel you should sit, where you belong. And even if you say nothing, sit there with confidence. I oftentimes I'll take a notepad and a paper in there, and how I navigate it is I take my notepad and my paper and pen in there, and I'll be doodling. I'm not writing no real notes because it may not be a subject that I care about. And in my mind, I'm going, I don't care. I don't care. Right. But I'm writing notes. And every now and again, I'll take my glasses off and I may look at somebody over my glasses or whatever, or I may nod my head. But I don't have nothing real to say. But guess what? You're going to notice me in the room. Even if I clear my throat, you're going to notice me in the room.
Yeah.
I was listening to Dr. Rebecca Jackson.
Yes.
And she was on there. Oh my goodness. I said her talk was fantastic. And when she talked about workplace trauma, that resonated with me because I was in some of those same places where I sat in a room one time and I provided what I thought was a great recommendation and nobody heard it, apparently, except me. And a white gentleman who was sitting right next to me said, he didn't say a portion of it. He said the exact same thing that I just spoke. I mean, verbatim.
Wow.
And everybody was like, oh, yeah, you know, good idea, good idea. Oh, yeah, great recommendation. We'll take that and we'll run with it. And I turned around and as they were commending him for this great idea, I looked at him and I said, wow, my idea sounded so much better coming out of your mouth than when it came out of mine.
I was wondering how you navigated that.
And all they could do was look at me. And one guy was like, oh, did you just say that? And I said, yes, I did. But when you it is owning who you are, even if you sit in there and don't say it. And I know, yes, I'm with you. There are times when I'm like, I go in the room and I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm so tired of coming into a room full of Caucasian males and ain't none of them my husband. You know, I'm not married to a white man, but I'm like, ain't none of them. I don't wake up with any of these men. I don't go to lay down with them at night, and all I see is them all day long. And it irritates me. And so that's why I said when I talk to other women of color and I say, listen, there's an opportunity. I want you to put your name in. And the difference is they may only have 2 or 3 of those characteristics, and they'll fill out that application and throw it in. We will sit, and if there are 10 listed and we don't have all 10, we won't even apply. We won't even apply ourselves to that position because we think somebody's going to watch. But the real thing is, and I said, the person who can tell the best story about you and what you do is you.
Yeah, that's real.
Put it down and then tell the story about you, tell what you can do. But it's difficult navigating it when we look and we don't see people who look like us. My thing is, if you want more people to look like you get in the place first,
Yeah,
and
that's
you
real.
open the door. I don't
Mhm.
care if it's the back door, but you open the door and you let the
Yeah.
others come in behind you.
That is it. That's it right there. Well, you just confirmed, you just affirmed me because I tell you, I was thinking like, oh, I don't feel like sitting at this table. I'm tired. Like I'm like, let me just at least, if I'm at to sitting here with all of y'all, let at least make me comfortable. Can I sit on the chair in the background? But it's important.
Yeah.
It is important. And for others
Yeah.
who are watching, one of the things I learned is when you are the only one in the room, even when you don't think anybody's watching, everybody's watching. Like
Every
even when I'm not even conscious of it, I'm like, hey, I'm just sitting here. Like you know,
yes.
everyone's watching. They're watching your mannerisms. They're watching what
Yes.
you're saying, whether or
Yes.
not they perceive competency. It's because it's
Yes.
all perception. So all of those things are kind of like those unspoken things that are going on in a room that, to your point, you
Yeah.
have to feel comfortable and confident to even be able to step into that space.
Oh
Um,
yes. Absolutely. Even there were times just before I moved over to NSA, where I was in the room. It was my meeting. I called the meeting, and the people that came into the meeting, most of them were Caucasian, of course. And
mhm,
when they came into the meeting, I was already in there, and a gentleman said to me, he said, "Oh," he said, because we had some snack refreshments. He
mhm.
said, "Oh, can you do me a favor?" He said, "I know that it may be a little not what was the term he used, not correct to ask, but could you get me a cup of coffee?" And I looked at him and I said, "Oh," I said, "Well, no." And I said, "I don't get coffee, I don't drink coffee, and I don't make coffee." I said, "But the cups are over there, you can go get your own coffee." And so I just sat down at the desk, and then when my assistant came in and closed the door, they were like, "Okay, everybody's here, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to turn it over to Miss Alston." And the color drained out of his face. And he began to apologize to me after the meeting was over. And I said, "No, no, no." I said, "You showed me who you were. I don't need an apology from you. No, thank you."
You're not the first person I've heard that story from, and that's why it's wow.
Yes. Sit at the
Wow.
table. If you want coffee, coffee over there. I don't care if I am the EA who should be doing it. No, no, no. I'm going to sit at the table.
Exactly.
You want the coffee? Go on over there and do it yourself.
My,
Don't get up and
my,
appease
my.
anybody. If I'm drinking the coffee, I'm gonna get myself some coffee. But if I'm not drinking it, you best believe I'm not gonna get it for you. But that is what I'm saying. Don't compromise. That's why I said don't compromise who you are. Stand in your confidence, stand in your values, and stand in your beliefs. Don't become who they think you should be. Be yourself.
That's good. That's good. I was going to ask you as our closing question, what would you want to leave our audience with? But I think you just did. But if there were
Yes.
two things, if there are two other things, or you can repeat the same thing, because I always think that repetition is how we remember. Two things that you want the young girl who just started out, she's fresh out of college, and she says, when I grow up, I want to be like Miss Alston. What do I need to, what are some things I should be thinking about? What should I know? All the things.
Oh my. Have confidence in yourself of who you are. Never look at someone else and say, "I want to look like them." As a matter of fact, a young lady did say, "I want to be just like you." And I said, "Honey, be better than me."
That's good.
Aspire to be better than the person that you are looking at saying, "I want to be like."
That's good. I love it. I love it. I love it. Thank you so much. This has been a great conversation because what we
Yeah.
actually dived in, I didn't know we were going to talk about, which I think it was great. Yes. So thank you so much for coming. Tell the audience if they wanted to reach out to you, how is the best way for them to reach out to you if they needed to?
Oh my stars. Okay, so I'm the old lady that says I don't have an Instagram, so I don't.
What about LinkedIn?
I do have LinkedIn. I have not updated it, but
So I will
I
put your LinkedIn profile in the show notes. That'll give you a chance to update it prior to this podcast
yes, yes.
going live.
And they can always send me an email. So I'm always available by email, and it's at valary@hotmail.com. They can send me an email, or they can track me down on LinkedIn. I will be more than happy to talk to whomever.
Well, thank you so much. I enjoyed our discussion. For all who is listening, thank you so much for listening. Please follow us again at Join the Climb on LinkedIn and on Instagram, on Facebook. I think it's The Climb. It'll all be in the show notes. And we look forward to seeing you next episode. Have a good evening.